how fast time flies.
Good morning, Rabbi Neely. How are you?
Doing fine, Joseph. Doing fine. You?
Doing great. It's funny that you're going to be doing about the stairs because yesterday we're talking about the eulogy of Rabbi Lieberman, the one from the Lieberman clause for the conservative movement.
Yes.
I don't know if you ever heard the eulogy for him.
No, I don't believe I ever did.
It is that he died on his way from Israel to the United States on the plane. Right. So it was that bound between both places. And the eulogy was that it was the time for the death of Lieberman. So the angels of Israel were asking for them to carry the soul of him because he was still in Israel. But then the angels outside of Israel were fighting because they wanted the honor to carry his soul. And God said, enough. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to go down and carry Lieberman's soul to heaven.
That's a nice story.
Yeah. I paraphrased it, but that was the eulogy. And it was related to this parsha.
Well, it is a rich parsha, and one that I wish we could do every last verse together. But if we did, we'd still be talking into the night, which is a nice thing. But unfortunately, I do have other obligations. Not that they're unfortunate obligations, but they do prevent us from that. But if we dive in, we can get a little bit of a look into this amazing parasha, which begins in such a mundane way, which is, of course, one of the teachings of this Torah portion itself. So let's go ahead and begin. We are in chapter 28. Parashat Vayeitzei begins on verse 10. Another example of a disagreement between us and others of where chapter breaks should go. And as a little bit of the backstory, previously in the life of Isaac, we are in the parasha after the story of Jacob and Esau, the famous part with all of the deception going on. And Jacob has been told to leave because he should go get married back in Haran, back in the land, most recently where his grandfather Abraham had come from and where distant relatives still live. This is not only, of course, for him to get married, but it is also a chance for him to escape Esau and not be murdered, which is always high on the list. So with that in mind, he is now setting off, and this is how the opening of his adventure happens. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. Just as an FYI, Beersheba is in the what would be called the southern area of Israel. It's north of the large Negev, the desert, but many people didn't live there. So it's sort of at the southern tip of the usual habitation range back in those days. And Haran, on the other hand, is up in what would be considered modern-day Syria. He came upon a certain place. The phrase is just makom. Now, it is bamakom, which, as you'll see in our commentary, is room for a bit of a query, because bamakom means the place, as opposed to the indefinite article a. As such, we have to speculate which place is it that he is reaching here. So he came upon the place and stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking out of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. All right, again, seems like it's a normal activity. He's just camping for the night and he's using a stone for pillow. What's so unusual here? Well, first of all, just linguistically, notice makom, makom, makom. This word for the place, the place, the place is being mentioned 3 times. Usually, that should draw our attention to this, that there is something going on here that is more than just a camping trip. Additionally, the fact that he takes a stone is also significant because, well, that's probably not the way he has lived up until this point. Jacob was a man of the tent. Remember, it was his brother Esau that was the man of the field. He is not necessarily pampered. Don't go too far in the opposite direction. But he certainly wasn't someone to have experienced just sleeping completely exposed, no tent, on the rough with a rock for his pillow. This is definitely probably physically the low point of his life, And emotionally, it's probably close to that as well, as he is leaving, as we talked about, for rather unfortunate reasons. So he is feeling miserable. He is sleeping on a rock, but he seems to be in a place that is worthy of note by the author. Verse 12. He had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached to the sky, and messengers of God were going up and down on it. Okay. Translations are hard. So let me just put a little bit of the information that we need to have in our mind. First of all, we have this sulam, this stairway, this ramp, this means of going up. That we seem to be relatively clear. And it was set on the ground. Well, it was set groundwards, might be a little bit more accurate. Arza is a directional adjective. It wasn't set on the ground, it was set towards the ground, which is a little ambiguous when we start trying to dig more deeply. And its top reached skyward. Now here, to the sky is pretty good, but of course, Shemaima doesn't necessarily mean the sky. It can also mean heaven, meaning the ethereal world beyond the physical world. So is this a vision of something reaching up into the atmosphere, or is this something reaching up into the supernal realm of heaven? Likewise, is this something reaching up, or is this something reaching down, or is this something reaching in both directions at the same time? It's a little unclear from the text. And then we get this word that gets absolutely erased in the translation, vehine. Now, it gets erased for good reason. I'm not faulting the JPS translators. It seems redundant. It's just saying, and behold, or in old King James English, and lo, L-O kind of lo, like lo and behold. It seems like an unnecessary addition, but we will be talking about it later, so I wanted to make sure you noticed it now. But it just means behold. It could just be a moment of inflection, and look at this, even more, something like that. But I do think something should have been included in the translation. But in any case, the messengers of God, well, Malachei Elohim are messengers of God, perfectly fine translation. But Malachei Elohim could also be translated as angels of God, which in English has a very different feeling. In Hebrew, the word messenger and angel is the same word. They don't mean the same, meaning somebody that is a messenger in one case is not necessarily being considered an angel. We do have a concept of supernatural versus natural messengers, but the word is one and the same. Whereas here, I pitied the poor JPS translator. Does he go with the word angel and concretize in English a particular image, or does he use the word messenger and leave it a bit more vague and open to interpretation? That's always going to be tricky. All right, so that is our first analysis of this stairway situation with the Malachim going up and down it. And then we get to verse 13. Vehine, since the translator didn't include it, I will point out that it is part of the verse. And standing beside him was Adonai, who said, I am Adonai, the God of your father Abraham's house, he decided to imply, and the God of Isaac's house. The ground on which you are lying, I will assign to you and your offspring. So God, who certainly as Adonai would have been well known by Jacob at this point, is revealing himself to Jacob through this dream, through this vision. And he is revealing himself as being the same God that was there for Abraham and the same God that was there for Isaac, and is going to be the same God that will be there for Jacob, and is making a promise. And this is probably a great reassurance. We're not going into it in our commentary, so I'll just go ahead and share some of the insights that they do have on this point. For a man who just committed deception against his father, deception and theft in many ways against his brother, and who is now running for his life, being told that God is still going to be with you and that his descendants will continue in the line of Abraham and Isaac, well, that actually had to be very reassuring for Jacob at that moment. But God continues, your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth, You shall spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. Very reminiscent of the blessing that God gave to Abraham. And again, an affirmation of the continuation that we have. 15, remember, I am with you. I will protect you. And wherever you go, I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So God's promise finishes off with this vahine, and again, here they're using the term remember, but God is saying that even though you're leaving this land, you will come back, and even though you leave this land, I will be there with you. In the ancient world, there was a strong understanding that gods were localized phenomena, meaning that the god of a particular town or the god of a particular area would have no power outside of that area. So that would have been a concern for most of the ancient people, that if they were leaving the territory that belonged to their god, that their god would no longer have the power to protect them. Obviously, Adonai is not limited in that way, but Jacob nonetheless still needs that reassurance. And indeed, Jacob takes it very powerfully when he awakens. Verse 16. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely Adonai is present in this place, and I did not know it. Again, we get our refrain of this place, that he is recognizing that there was something special, not just about the vision that he had, but about the, not just that he had the vision, that is to say, but that he had the vision in this location. As I was pointing out before, the makom, the place, seems to matter, and Jacob is commenting on that first out of everything that just happened. 17, shaken, he said, or awe-inspired or awe-struck, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven. So he calls it Beit Elohim, the house of God, and this is the Sha'ar HaShamayim, the gateway to heaven. So that is his verbal response, but then he has a physical response. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He named the site Beit El, house of God, but previously the name of the city had been Luz. Jacob then made a vow, saying, if God remains with me, protecting me on this journey that I am making, and giving me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I return safe to my father's house, Adonai shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's abode, and all of that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you. All right, we've talked about Jacob's vow here on other occasions, but just a quick reminder of things to consider and ponder. God made the promise to Jacob unconditionally, but Jacob seems to be responding as though there is a condition. He is still worried as a young man with nothing to his name, of hunger, of poverty, of danger, and he is perhaps apprehensive of whether or not he will be able to survive the challenges that come. But he is saying that should it be that he actually survive, then of course he would be very grateful to God, and he would respond through the building of a structure, of an altar of some sort, and of course of giving a tithe. God did not ask for payment. God did not ask for these conditions, but this may just be reflecting the growing maturity or immaturity of Jacob at this point, and how he will develop in his relationship with God. Certainly we see that very clearly when we see his return later on, but that's not for today's discussion. Before we jump into our conversation from our commentaries about today's parasha, which will focus much more on the stairway itself, are there any questions? Okay, then let's go ahead and get to our commentaries. Just need to adjust my screen. All right. So we begin with sort of an overview here with Rabbeinu Bachya. According to the plain meaning of the text, which is always a warning sign, anytime somebody as a commentator is claiming to be giving you the peshat, the Hebrew for the plain reading of a text, always ask yourself, are they actually giving me the Peshat, the plain meaning, or are they giving me a rendition of the meaning that they think should be the primary takeaway? And are they being 100% reliable in their claim, or could someone else disagree with what should be the plain meaning of the text? Well, I'll let you decide for yourself about Rabbeinu Bachia's interpretation, but that should be your go-to response. Anytime someone says, here's the Peshat, always say, okay, hold on, what are they going to say, and is it actually? Yaakov observed that the feet of the ladder stood in Beersheba, where he was lying, whereas the meaning of the words, its head reached heavenwards, refers to the temple, capital T, temple, meaning this is the gateway from which the angels ascend to heaven or descend to earth. When God appeared to be standing on top of the ladder, Yaakov realized that the site he was lying on was the gateway to heaven and that it was an appropriate place for prayer. The holy temple is the house of God. Yaakov realized that the holy temple was of crucial importance in channeling communication from man to God and vice versa. So, geographically, what Rabbeinu Bachia is saying is that our double directional ladder going earthwards and heavenwards seems to be implying a couple different things. It seems to be that Beersheba was where he was, because after all, he just left town, and he was just in that area outside that would have previously been called Luz, and that was this beginning of the gateway, that this was the opening to heaven, and that top of the ladder was referring to the temple itself. But as Rashi too quotes, to give it a little bit more clarity, from Bereshit Rabbah, the great Midrash collection, which describes the bottom of the ladder as standing in Beersheba, and the angle being such that the top was vertically above Mount Moriah. When the Midrash spoke about the angle of the elevation, it meant that at its zenith, the ladder was above Mount Moriah. In other words, the point at which it appeared to reach heaven was directly above where the holy temple would stand in the future. So Rabbeinu Bachia's claim for the Peshat understanding here is that the ladder was at an angle, like the one in the picture behind me. And the bottom of the ladder was standing in Beersheba, or the outskirts of Beersheba, but because of the direction, the northward slope of the ladder, the top of it would have been over what is now modern-day Jerusalem, which would have been peaked at the top, the zenith, of Har Moriah, the Temple Mount, where the temple would eventually stand. This addresses a couple different issues. One is that where was Jacob actually sleeping when he slept and called it Beit El? And if that place was so special, why wasn't the temple built there? And we do know where the temple was built, and it seems difficult to imagine that Jacob made it all the way from Beersheba to Jerusalem like that, because that's normally a multi-day journey, and thus it doesn't sound like he was already in Jerusalem. This neatly brings together those two questions and says, yes, on the ground was an important place, but the top of the ladder was also important, and it links where he was to where he is going. He's linking from present to future, and linking the present to the eventual establishment of the temple. Now, I'm guessing that many of you probably don't find that as being the simplest explanation for the vision that he had. That is partly because it's not. There are alternative explanations, some of which may seem simpler, some of which may not. But that's going to get into our whole discussion here about what actually did he see and what from it needs to be understood, and how do we separate these component parts. So going to Or HaChaim, we have to see, first of all, what was this experience like? Since many dreams contain matter without significance, meaning just because someone has a dream doesn't mean that the dream actually matters. There's all sorts of things that pop into someone's head. If you dream of a 18-legged cow, that doesn't necessarily have theological significance. You could try to make it. 18 is a wonderful Jewish number, but it may not have significance. Since many contain these things that are without significance, the Torah added the word vehine, which I drew your attention to indicate that in this dream, Every detail appeared to Jacob as especially vivid and significant. He had total recall of everything he dreamed and referred to each detail later on. This is why the word is repeated before every segment of the dream, as you noticed. Again, I tried to draw your attention. The Torah thereby characterizes the dream as a prophetic revelation. So, yes, sometimes dreams are full of nonsense. This dream does seem to be uniquely compact and uniquely full of import. And as such, we need to dig to try and find more. We can't just say that, oh, well, Jacob was feeling a little uncomfortable because of having run away under the circumstances, and God's giving him a pat on the head saying, don't worry, it'll be okay. Yes, that may be part of the message, but to think that that was the only component of the message, the only content, would be missing out on the fact that the version of the dream that we receive in the Torah seems to be drawing our attention, v'hinei, 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 over and over, that these things are significant, not merely the wrapper around the message inside. So let's go ahead and see what some of those other interpretations of the significance might be. In a prophetic dream, he showed Jacob that whatever is done on earth is affected by means of the angels, and everything is by decree given to them by the Supreme One, meaning God. The angels of God, remember that Malachei Elohim, that phrase that we looked at, whom the Eternal has sent to walk to and fro through the earth, would not do anything minor or major until they return to present themselves before the Master of the whole world, saying before him, we have traversed the earth, and behold, it dwells in peace, or is steeped in war and blood. And he commands them to return, to descend to the earth and fulfill his charge. All right, so what is Ramban keying in on here? What is his trigger for wanting to look at an element and deduce from this? Well, if we go back to our original text and we look at the motion of the angels, these Malachei Elohim olim v'yordim bo, right? They are going up and they are coming down. Now, why is that significant enough to draw the attention of a commentary like Ramban? Well, because if you have a ladder that's stretching from heaven to earth, you might be inclined to think that the angels are going to start in heaven, come down the ladder. But here, the angels are going up the ladder first in the order of the sentence, and then coming down it. Now, you might have been inclined to say, that's just a figure of speech, right? It's like if we say, Bob always comes and goes, that doesn't necessarily mean the coming always comes before the going, right? If I say we had to stand up and down, that doesn't mean necessarily the order in which these things are happening. But in the Torah, we don't rely on explanations of being just simple idiom unless there really is nothing else that can be said about a particular turn of phrase. And here, Ramban is explaining there is something that we can learn from this, at least one thing. We are learning that the angels actually observe the earth. And how do we know that? Well, we saw that in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah just last time we were together, when we were studying Vayera. And now they have to then report, and then they return to fulfill whatever their mission might be. This is a theological vision of the world that is trying to explain that the angels are these manifestations of God's insight into the world, God's care into the world, and God's command, God's directive, God's will into the world. And that nothing happens without there being that linkage between them. That heaven is not a separate realm cut off and blind to the world. That no, it is constantly aware of whether things are peaceful or whether they are full of war and blood. And that God's commands are based upon the actions of this world. God is not decreeing in ignorance. God is not decreeing in absence. God is decreeing for this world based upon this world. That what is done on earth is affected by the means of angels. That there is this interplay between us and them through the commands of God. Questions, comments before we move on to an alternative explanation of our up and down? A reminder, you can always unmute at any time. It's very hard to see when people are getting ready to ask a question, so just do so. And likewise, if you are in the YouTube chat box, feel free to type a chat question anytime, and I'll get to it as soon as I can catch it out of the corner of my eye. So Rashi has a different explanation. Well, I say Rashi, this is also from Bereshit Rabbah. It states first ascending and afterwards descending. Again, seems like the wrong order. Those angels who had accompanied him in the land of Israel were not permitted to leave the land. They ascended to heaven, and angels which were to minister outside the land descended to accompany him. So, although we don't believe that God is limited in his reign to any one portion of the world, but is instead universal, Rashi is bringing a midrash which says angels do have more limited jobs, that these existences that God has to administer to parts of the world are not given free will. They are not given independent authority or power, and as such, they cannot move past their jurisdiction. They are limited in what they can and can't do. And here the can't is what's most important. As Jacob is leaving the land, he is going to leave behind those angels that were with him in the land, and new ones who have authority, charge, power, agency outside the land of Israel will now accompany him going forward. And again, it's an interesting theological statement of trying to draw a distinction between God in universal and the particulars of our interaction in the specific. Questions or comments before we change gears a little? We'll be leaving the up and down question behind. All right, so we are returning more to this general concept of what was this vision actually trying to tell us. And we're going back to Rambam, Maimonides, as opposed to Ramban, Nachmanides. And in his Yesodei HaTorah in Mishnah Torah, he writes the following. When a prophet is informed of a message in a vision, it is granted to him in metaphoric imagery. Right? Prophets, except for Moses, don't interact with God like conversationally in perfect prose and easy to understand, just laid out wording. Instead, there is always going to be an image. We see this in this vision. We see this in the dreams with Joseph, interpreting both the cupbearer and the baker and Pharaoh's dreams. We see this in dream after dream after dream. There is always some element of metaphor, of imagery. And the prophets, of course, are the most famous examples of this. Immediately, the interpretation of the imagery is imprinted upon his heart, and he knows its meaning. So, in case you are worried that the prophet would have a vision but not know what it meant, Rambam is assuring us that no, the prophets are given an explanation, and then they will need to convey that explanation. And he gives an example. The ladder which the angels ascending and descending envisioned by the patriarch Jacob was an allegory for the empires and their subjugation of his descendants. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, Rambam is saying that this up and down activity is not just a personal insight for Jacob himself. Yes, there is certainly an element of comfort, and the very fact that God is talking to him had to be reassuring, but he was also being given an image of the ascent and descent of empires over the ages. And indeed, we know that was a primary theme for many of the later prophetic visions that talk about those empires that would rise and subjugate us, and those empires would then fall. Thus, we see the rising first and the falling second, but now it's not being the angels in and of themselves, it's the fate and fortune of different empires. And Rambam considers that to be the primary vision here, because he is seeing in the reassurance, that is being given to Jacob, as I will not only bring you back to this land, but you will be spread out, you will be a source of blessing to the other nations, which implies that we will be dispersed and that we will be protected wherever we go. That these are not just general promises to Jacob himself, but these are enormous promises to Jacob's offspring, which, as you remember, was the key element at the end of the initial I am your God of your ancestors, and I will be with your offspring. So Rambam believes that that makes that a clearer explanation of what's being told here, rather than just, hey, you and your family will come back one day. It's you, the nation, will go and will come back, and there will be multiple empires that rise and fall, but you will still be protected. Sforno has a similar view. This foreshadowed the future when the angels of God, meaning the superpowers who had become very powerful in our own world, would begin their decline and end up at the bottom of the rungs of the ladder. The Lord God who stood above the ladder is the symbol of the promise that God will never abandon the Jewish people. As we know from Jeremiah 46, even when I utterly destroy all the Gentile nations, I will not destroy you. So there's this additional interpretation that this vision of up and down is a foreshadowing vision. It's a long-term prophecy, but it's also a long-term sense of consolation, something that is echoed throughout Jeremiah and, of course, the other prophets as well. So that's another complete interpretation of how to handle this ladder and the angels. The sort of one example would be that this is just an outline of where the temple will stand. Another explanation is that this is about Jacob's own personal destiny. And a third here is about the destiny of the Jewish people as a whole. All of these can be interpreted out of this beautiful vision. But wait, there's more. So it's always fun to dabble in gematria, which is the use of Hebrew letters as numbers, as Hebrew letters are numerical equivalents, much like the Roman numerals work. There's always a temptation to overdo it, but sometimes I consider a careful use of gematria to be of some important insight. The numerical value of the letters of the word sulam equals 130, which is the same numerical value as the letters of the word Sinai, meaning Mount Sinai. This was a hint that the Jewish people would receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. All right, so what is the Atzekenim saying? Well, he's saying that not only is this sulam interesting numerically because it matches Sinai, but that if we look at this exchange between God and Jacob, really what we are seeing is a proto-Toraic covenant, that this is God saying, I am going to help, I am going to protect, I will bless you and you will bless others. And that really this is what comes to fruition when the nation of Israel stands at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. Likewise, you can see the slope of the ladder as being symbolic of us at the base of Mount Sinai and Torah being at the heavenwards tip of Mount Sinai. And so there is a parallel here that is more than just a coincidental number exchange. Now, Akedat Yitzchak has more insights to share. Those who say that the ladder seen by Jacob refers to a statue, because Sulam and Semel are also connected, being anagrams of each other. Remember, in Hebrew, anagrams are incredibly easy because the vowels are not locked in place by letters. And so the consonants are much more fluid, and you can put many different vowels into them. So Sulam and Semel are anagrams of each other. But we also just saw that it can refer to Sinai because it is numerically equivalent to it. They are indulging in midrash. So wonderful line to parallel what we said before about Peshat. There is always a tension between how much do we spin additional interpretations that may not be anchored explicitly in the text itself, and how much of those explanations are anchored explicitly but need to be spun out, or else we'll miss them. Here, Akedat Yitzchak is taking a bit of a harder line. And he's saying, look, I'm not saying they're wrong and they're interesting, but that may not be the core meaning of this passage. Rabbi Solomon ibn Gabriel, the Spaniard, says that Jacob's ladder alludes to man's heavenly soul. So we're not talking about history, we're not talking about geography, we're not talking about a family fate. We're talking about the actual soul that is within each of us. And that the angels of God signify thoughts of wisdom. Now, that interpretation is not 100% to his liking either. And Ibn Ezra is going to take issue with that. Because again, it's not that it's wrong. Certainly, our soul does stretch to heaven. It locks between earth and heaven beautifully. And our thoughts, our prayers, our wisdom, that is what links us to the upper realms. But these commentators, says Ibn Ezra, have not apparently studied the prophecies of Zechariah, Amos, and Jeremiah. The way to interpret Jacob's dream is to view it as a parable, meaning that they don't need to fixate on everything. Well, all of the prophets will use big words and visions and grandiose images to try and get across an idea, and you don't have to latch on to everything with so much vigor that you end up creating interpretations that were not intended. Instead, Ibn Ezra argues, the way to interpret Jacob's dream is to view it as a parable. It teaches that nothing is hidden from God, and that what happens below is contingent on the decree from above, as we talked about at the beginning. There is thus, as it were, a ladder linking heaven and earth by which angels ascend to inform God what they have seen on earth after going over it. Scripture also states that other angels come down to fulfill God's commands. The imagery presented is that of a king and his servants. So he's, look, it's not that complicated. The world above, the world below are linked. A ladder, that's a good image for it. Sure, a ladder. And what happens below is understood by the world above, and what the world above wants is implemented in the world below, and that flow of data and will is explained by angels. Good, done, move on. It's again, trying to say that even what some other people might consider to be peshat is actually midrash, and we should make sure we don't lose sight of that. What's the right word for it? The more obvious theme. Sometimes people are so eager to run after anagrams and gematria and mysticism and spirituality in all of its varied forms that they run right past some of the more obvious interpretations and thus miss the obvious interpretations. But the thing is, the obvious interpretations are obvious for a reason, meaning that they are meant to be found. We are meant to connect to them, to understand them first, because they often are more critical. A person can get through life without ever recognizing the anagram of Semel and Sulam and be a perfectly fine person. But a person who believes that this world and heaven are completely cut off from each other, and that God does not care about this world, and what we do is not understood or known by God, is going to be in a much more difficult situation for their spiritual path. So the obvious is not to be skewed. It is not to be denigrated. You should not say, oh, well, that's obvious. Good. If it's obvious, grab hold of it. Make sure you've learned it. Make sure you understand it. And then look for the other, creative interpretations as well. Now, Akedat Yitzchak will give us our next interpretation. Man's intellectual research proceeds from the effect to the cause. What does he mean by this? I know it's a little philosophical, bear with me. Something that the Torah describes as aliyah, ascent, in Jacob's dream of the ladder. Once Jacob arrives at the ultimate cause and obtains divine insights, he retraces his steps to view all phenomena from a new and different vantage point. So in some ways, channeling Ibn Gabriel's, the idea of the journey of the soul, what Akedat Yitzchak is arguing here is that this ladder can symbolize the journey of our own spiritual development. When someone comes to recognize that by looking at the effects, meaning the world around us, the life around us, the history of us, and if they can look at that and then begin to infer what causes that, which ultimately is going to go through the pyramid of causation, you will arrive at the top. And at the top, of course, is God, one and only. If you want to know, how my pencil got made, you're going to eventually come back to God. That's what he means by climbing from effect to cause. And he's saying that the imagery of that is this ladder, that Jacob is out, he is sitting with his head on the rock, and he is contemplating the world, his place in it. How did he get here? How does this world get here? And that's leading him to a deeper understanding of God than he had prior to that moment. Once he has that insight, then when he comes back to the world, meaning when he wakes from this vision, his world looks different. Now that he looks out and he sees the sun, the moon, and the stars, he sees the mountain and the river, he sees himself, he sees his family, he sees his history. He has a very different view of what it means now that he has had that experience. And that's the up and down, says Ek Akedat Yitzchak, that we need to hold on to. Now, rather than finish on that, which I think is quite close to Ibn Ezra's idea of a Peshat understanding, I did want to give another one of the more mystical interpretations as well. So from Nefesh HaChaim, we read, and this is also the matter of our father Yaakov's vision of the ladder. Refer to, and he breathed into his nostrils a soul, meaning nishmat, of life. This is referring all the way back to Genesis, when God creates Adam Rishon, the first human being. We are told that it is done through this blowing into the earth, and that blowing is a neshama, the word that is also used for our soul, about which it is said, and he dreamed, and lo, there was a ladder. So what is the connection here? The ladder is definitely the living soul, the neshama, as if to say, via the living soul, your neshama that is positioned on the earth, its lowest edge clothing itself in man's body, meaning that our soul is that ladder. Our soul is what stretches between this world, the lowest edge, the hem of our soul, if you will, touching this material, physical existence. And the rest of us is what is stretched between here and Shemaim, the heavens above. That is the gift that God gave by blowing a soul into dirt. We are embedded in this world during this lifetime, but we are still made of the stuff of which the heavens are made, which is not actually stuff, but that's a whole nother conversation. And that we are this ladder stretched out itself. And as such, there really is a way that we can try and pull all of these different visions together to talk about the physicality of worship in a place. The first commentaries talking about the location of the temple, and of course giving good honor to the fact that makom, 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 the place, was repeated so many times in this vision, that the physical world does matter. God put us in the physical world for a reason, and that through different physical places and through our own physical life, we do have a different connection to the world above, to heaven. Likewise, by recognizing that this world around us is being constantly connected to and observed by God, and that God is ensuring that we, Jacob's descendants, are continually able to benefit from the blessing that God tried to give him, we recognize that heaven and earth are linked much more tightly than we often imagine. Many of us go through our average day thinking of this world as the totality of everything, and thinking of heaven, if at all, as being so otherworldly as to be beyond consideration, or for us to be beyond heaven's consideration. If we think of this ladder, if we think of our own soul, if we think of the own span of history, if we think of the locations that have been sacred to our people throughout the thousands of years, we can recognize that there is an intimate and unbreakable bond between this world and the world above, and between our existence in this material realm and our existence simultaneously in the realm of the spirit. This ladder is not something that should be skimmed over and just turned into beautiful paintings, but it is something that should inspire and reinvigorate us each day, as we recognize that we are always straddling, ascending and descending along this ladder, and that this world is governed and is powered by something more than just mundane forces. Any questions or comments? All right, then we will need to wrap it up for today. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day. A reminder that we'll have Mishnah class again tonight. We were off last week, just like this class for Thanksgiving, but look forward to getting back to our study there as well. Take care.